What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer with BamaOnLine.com, and this is our Alabama football pregame show. Probably not the pregame show we thought we were going to be having at this point in the season, but here we are nonetheless. And I know we didn't talk about it after the game. Blake and I were in Oklahoma, and some other guys on the site had some things going on, but kind of wanted to turn it over to you guys for the final thoughts on the Oklahoma game. We talked about it beforehand. We're going to split it up to do kind of good cop, bad cop a little bit. And I know, Jimmy, you always have some good opinions. So I'm going to ask you, from this Oklahoma loss, 24-3 loss on the road in Norman, what was the biggest disappointment that you had from watching that game that Alabama really struggled with?
Yeah, I'm usually so optimistic and positive. It freaks people out when I go dark. Like, oh, Jimmy's dark. Somebody better check on him. But for me, it was just the fact that the offense was such a no-show, because there's a stat, I think I've typed it out 17 times this week, partly just to inform people and partly to remind myself of this fact that going into Saturday, this is true. It seems impossible to believe after watching that game, but going into Saturday, only 4 teams in all of college football had scored more touchdowns than Alabama. That seems shocking after Saturday. But it's true. Alabama was literally, I think, 4th or 5th in the nation out of 134 teams, not the Power 5, not the SEC, all of college football, in scoring touchdowns. So it had been a remarkably productive offense if points mean anything. And then Saturday they got 3 points total against a 5-5 football team. And I know Oklahoma is good on defense. They really are. They got, half that defense is going to play in the NFL. I mean, they're good. But it's just so disappointing that you could be that productive. The whole season is on the line. The playoffs are on the line, and score 3 points and lose the game and almost certainly lose out in the playoff. That's a disappointment. That's going to be hard for me to get over, maybe ever, to be honest.
Yeah, it's the worst showing I've seen since I've started covering the team, especially from an offensive standpoint. The 3 points is embarrassing. And you're right. I mean, you look at the points Alabama's been able to put up. I mean, only one of those touchdowns this season came from someone other than the offense. They have 1 non-offensive touchdown. So they've been able to score. I think the explosive plays just weren't there. There was a lot of things that went wrong. Obviously, the turnovers from Jalen were big. But, yeah, it was – Oklahoma does deserve some credit. They've got dudes on that side of the ball, to use one of your terms, and I think that they're talented. But you look at what teams like Texas and others have done against them, and you thought, well, Alabama was stopping them from going out and doing the same thing. So definitely reason and understandable reasons to be frustrated, disappointed, all those buzzwords. But I think there were some bright spots too, and that's where we're gonna take the optimism away from Jimmy and give it to Blake in this part of the segment. Blake, what do you kind of take away as a bright spot from the Oklahoma game, if anything?
Well, there's not much. There's not many bright spots you can take away, but I honestly thought the defense performed well in the second half. And it's interesting because they technically gave up, or the team gave up more points in the second half than they did in the first, with that 10-3 halftime deficit. But really, Oklahoma was doing everything it wanted to offensively in the first half, specifically with the quarterback run game and kind of the option style-centric offense that they were doing. I think they totaled over 250 yards on the ground or in the first half. And they were just running all up and down the field. And Alabama was lucky that they had only given up 10 points when halftime came around, because they had that one drive Oklahoma did where they got into Alabama territory, dropped a wide open touchdown, and then missed the field goal on 4th down on the next play, and the deficit could have been even worse. But then in the second half, Alabama's defense tightened up. They gave up significantly less yards on the ground, and Oklahoma didn't really have a touchdown drive in the second half. The 2 touchdowns that Oklahoma scored in the second half came off of about a 15-yard short field off of the Milroe interception off of the screen. And then I think it was the very next drive or 2 drives later, the pick 6, which isn't even a touchdown given up by the defense. And so time and time again, even though the hole was so deep that they were in, the defense continually got stops, and Oklahoma's punter got a lot more work in the second half than he did in the first half. So I think if there's anything positive to take away, it's that, because it's really interesting. They didn't give up as many points in the first half, but overall, yardage wise, I thought the performance was worse from the defense. There were adjustments made, and those adjustments just didn't result in the outcome Alabama would have liked because of the way other areas of the team performed.
Yeah, it's so different from the other two losses because you look at Tennessee, the defense played well, but a lot of the yardage on the ground came in the second half. And although Alabama was able to get stops, that's when Dylan Sampson started to really break free. And then on the flip side of that, offensively, kind of going back to what Jimmy was talking about, against Vanderbilt, the offense was able to do things. You know, the mistake early, the interception, obviously put them back in a hole, but I think you felt good about Alabama's chances if they were able to get the ball back in Nashville. They just weren't able to. So, yeah, it's kind of a culmination of all things kind of went wrong. But I agree. I thought the defense, from an adjustment standpoint, did some better things in the second half. And they're going to have to do that this week against Auburn. But the loss, that's the third of the season for Alabama. Right now, whenever you look at the college football playoff rankings, they're on the outside looking in. They're the second team out, number 13 in the rankings, but the second team out. And that's kind of where we're going to kind of transition to is just, this week, there are 2 weeks really left before those final rankings come out. We learned that 12-team playoff, the first one ever. But right now, Alabama's going to need some help. So it's Thanksgiving week. There's a ton of football. It's kind of spread out over the course of Thursday through Saturday. First with you, Jimmy, just from a non-Iron Bowl standpoint, where does your attention turn whenever you're going to turn on the TV this weekend?
Yeah, well, it's multiple games, and me and you both have talked about that the last couple of days, and laid out several this morning. But I think to boil it all down to what we're saying is for Alabama to have a spot, and they would very much like a spot, even if you're mad at the football team fans. Alabama could probably use the millions of dollars that come with the college football playoff appearance, so they would like to be in the playoff. If for Alabama to get in, guys, I think the path is this. The ACC has to be a one-bid league. I mean, that's the way in. I mean, there's other way. I mean, Notre Dame could lose maybe fall out. I doubt it, but maybe Indiana loses to 29-point underdog Purdue, and then they'd be out. But realistically, the ACC getting down to a one-bid league, that means Clemson, Miami, SMU, 2 of them have to go away. Mm-hmm. I think Clemson could conceivably go away in the ACC championship game if they got there. It would take Miami losing to Syracuse for that to happen. Clemson, I think, would probably be out with an ACC championship game loss, a third loss in a weak schedule. So in my mind, it's Miami-Syracuse, just simply because this is really the only chance for Miami to potentially be out. I think if Miami beats Syracuse and goes to ACC championship game and loses, they're probably still in. With just, that would just be their second loss, and it would be in a championship game. So I think that's the game kind of Alabama almost has to have. But Alabama, there are so many options out there. It's not definitive either because there's other games that could fall a certain way and it would help Alabama. But if I had to pick one, it would be Miami at Syracuse. And frankly, Miami's played such kind of a weak schedule the way it's worked out. This is actually one of Miami's most difficult games to win, maybe the most difficult, frankly.
Yeah, that's a wild statement to kind of say out loud, if we're being honest. I do think the ACC is interesting. I think this SMU Cal game, if you're an Alabama fan and want to see this team get in the playoff, you kind of rooting for Cal because if you get South Carolina beat Clemson and then SMU to lose its next 2 games, including the ACC championship game, that might do it. It's kind of crazy that it seems that simple. Now, granted, SMU is going to be favored over Cal, and that's a game that they should win. But if those things happen, we've seen stranger things this late in the season, right before the selection committee makes its picks happen. So, Blake, what about you? Is it as simple as the ACC, or are there things maybe elsewhere that you have your attention on? And it doesn't necessarily have to be for Alabama's playoff chances, but I think for most of us, that's kind of where we're looking at this time of year.
Yeah, I think as far as Alabama's playoff chances, you've got to look at the ACC. The South Carolina-Clemson game is interesting because I wonder what the committee does if South Carolina beats Clemson, because then you have a South Carolina team with a lot of really good wins, but you have Alabama with a win over South Carolina. So I think that would be really interesting to watch because that would knock Clemson out of the playoff discussion. Even though they may still be alive for the ACC title because this isn't an ACC game. But outside of playoff discussions, I'm really interested in the Texas A&M game. Just from a college football fan perspective, it still has a lot of meaning for the SEC championship. The winner is going to go and face Georgia in Atlanta, but just for the Lone Star Showdown rivalry to be back and to be one of the rare instances where realignment has brought a rivalry back together rather than breaking it up. I think that's really unique, and it's in Kyle Field. You have the underdog being the home team in this game. So I think it's going to be one of the better environments that college football sees this year. And though it doesn't have a ton of bearing on Alabama's playoff stance or anything like that, I think it's just going to be a really fun game and great for any fan of college football.
Yeah, I think a Texas A&M win would certainly make things interesting just for the playoff committee standpoint. Yeah, that's another wrinkle. So many things can happen, but I think that's a game a lot of people have been looking forward to all year. It's rivalry weekend is such a good weekend for just helmet games and games you want to tune in for. And I'm honestly glad that you don't have like the Egg Bowl on Thanksgiving. I know that might be a hot take, but I'm glad that that's on a Friday. It's kind of away from the NFL and just time with the family. You can, whenever you're on that Thanksgiving hangover, you can watch the Egg Bowl and just watch the insanity that is. I think that's pretty fun too. But obviously the game that really matters for Alabama's season is this weekend with Auburn coming to town, and going to we're going to close out the episode with several things, but really focusing on the Iron Bowl. And one thing I wanted to ask you guys about, obviously Jalen Milroe's performance in Oklahoma was probably his worst in an Alabama uniform. But, this game last year, Jalen writ his name in Crimson Flame with what he was able to do against Auburn. And our over-under of the week is going to be total yards for Jalen Milroe. And looking at his season average, it's about 274 on the year. So I gave it to you guys at 275 from an over-under standpoint. And I'll preface it with this. Last year at Auburn, he had 366 and 2 passing touchdowns, able to run for over 100 on the ground. And honestly, if he can do that again, I think people would be very happy. But this Auburn defense it's pretty good. And so I'll turn it over to you guys, starting with you first, Jimmy. When you look at Jalen and from a total yardage standpoint, do you think he can get over that 275 threshold?
Yeah, my answer is yes, for a couple of reasons. He did it a year ago against Auburn. I think, like Alabama itself, I think, Jalen's likely to bounce back. I mean, unfortunately, we've got already some evidence that this Alabama team's pretty good at bouncing back after the losses. They've looked pretty good after 2 prior losses. So I'm going to go over. I'll just caution my own answer with this. When you look at Jalen's overall season numbers, it's clear to me that last year when they really turned the offense over to Jalen, Tommy Rees and Nick Saban sort of turned a lot of it over to Nick Saban's arm and that deep pass and sort of, really fixated on that. And that opened up the run, a little bit for Jalen and even the backs. This year, it seems to me that DeBoer and Sheridan have sort of built it around Jalen's legs, first and foremost, that's what they really trust. And that's worked out well and bad both, like last weekend when Oklahoma took that away and Alabama didn't have really anything else to answer with. I think Alabama's going to have to be a little more balanced this week, because I think if the plan is against Auburn, like the Oklahoma plan, that hey, we're just going to go into this game and trust that we're going to get it done with Jalen's legs, I don't know that Jalen will hit that 275 number or that Alabama will have enough success. I think for Alabama to win, they've got to be far more balanced, and they've got to hit some of these pass plays down the field, which will in turn help Jalen maybe have a little more room to run up front. And if so, Alabama will be successful, which is what I think will happen. So I'm going with the over, but I'm a little nervous about the plan, to be honest, because I'm suffering a little PTSD from last weekend.
Yeah, I think this past weekend, Nick Sheridan said it on Monday, a little too east and west, and wanted to see him get a little more north and south. And I think everybody can agree with that. You could tell early in the game that was a problem, and he wasn't having much success against that Oklahoma defense. And I think that gives this Auburn defense some confidence. We've heard what they've been saying down on the plains. That's been a confident bunch this week, whether it was orchestrated or not. And so I think for Jalen, that's why I put it at the total yardage. I think you're right, Jimmy. They need to have a balanced approach offensively. I think if you can connect with some of those explosive plays that we really haven't seen the last several weeks, that'll be big for the run game. And boy, it's a shame that Ryan Williams touchdown didn't count, because what a hell of a play by the freshman. And I think if you can have 4 + 2 = 6 a couple times this weekend, that'll be big, not only just for the offense, but just the things that have been said by Auburn's players and how Ryan Williams isn't a big time player. And so I think that they have a lot to prove, no lack of motivation. But Blake, where do you stand just on an over-under standpoint on Jalen and that 275 total yard mark?
Yeah, I'm going over as well. I just feel like this feels like a spot where he has to bounce back. And we've seen him bounce back a number of times this year, and really there's nowhere to go but up. Like, I would agree this is, or last week, I should say, was probably the worst game of his Alabama career. And so going off of that, I expect the offense to have a little more balance. I don't expect there to be so much reliance on the quarterback run. And I think it was great in the LSU game. And obviously that was the reason that they were able to win the game the way that they did. But I felt like in the Oklahoma game, there needed to be a little more shifting once you understood that wasn't working. You needed to be able to adjust the game plan a little bit more. I think they'll go into this game knowing that. And like you said, there will be a little more balance. This feels like a Ryan Williams game to me. And so part of going over on that total means there's going to be a lot of passes thrown to Ryan Williams. And I think if Ryan Williams has a big game, a lot of that yardage is credited to Jalen Milroe as well. And so last week could have been a huge Ryan Williams game, and it almost was, with that huge touchdown that was called back. And then you also had the crazy highlight early in the game that got called back because he stepped out of bounds, but it was still just an insane display of athleticism and open field moves and everything like that. So I think Ryan Williams is going to have a big game, which means Jalen Milroe will also have a big game. So I do think he goes over that 275 mark.
I'm with you guys. I think this is the first time since we've been doing the over-under we're all in agreement. And I just think this could be Jalen's last home game. Obviously, he had a stinker last week against Oklahoma. He's a competitive guy. He's come up after the game. He's come up, during the media availability this week. He's kind of faced it head on. And I think he's someone that's just ready to bounce back. And they want to close out the regular season the right way. And that's all well and good, but that is all talk. And I do think, though, like Jimmy said, they've been able to bounce back after these disappointing performances. And I think with it being at home, no lack of motivation this week, it's all there. And to keep the little kind of fleeting college football playoff hopes alive, you have to win. And I think Alabama could benefit from making a statement too. And I think their quarterback is poised to do that. So what about the rest of the team, though, guys? We're going to talk about some key matchups. What's something, when you look at how these teams stack up, Jimmy, that stands out to you right away?
Well, I think what has me worried from an Alabama sense in terms of the key matchup for me is 2 years ago when Auburn came to Tuscaloosa with head coach Carnell Williams. Doesn't that feel like a lifetime ago?
Yes.
That last time Auburn was in Tuscaloosa, Carnell Williams was the head coach. Auburn had a lot of success with quarterback runs that day. And this year, in 2 of Alabama's 3 losses, quarterback runs had a ton to do with it. And to me, Auburn is not going to have a big day completing passes down the field. I have a hard time believing that. But what I can see is Auburn having a lot of success in the RPO game with Peyton Thorne as an athlete and Jarquez Hunter, who may be the best running back in this league. I think that inside run, the inside RPO, where the quarterback may keep it or he may give it, and it's inside the tackles and with a lot of movement and pulls and traps, it scares me a little bit just because I've seen it work against Alabama. I saw it work well when Auburn was here 2 years ago. And I think it's the key matchup in this game. Alabama's front 6, for lack of a better term, because that's literally what they have: 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, most snaps. So it's really a front 6, not a front 7. But Alabama's front 6 against Auburn's quarterback run / RPO game.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because the blueprint's kind of there. Vanderbilt kind of laid it down. Oklahoma picked it up and ran with it. And I would be shocked if Auburn doesn't try to mix some of that in because it has had success against this Alabama defense. And it's an Alabama defense that's going to be without Deontay Lawson. We learned that earlier this week, which is another huge blow. You lose two veteran linebackers and two good dudes, which sucks. But Alabama's going to have to pick up the pieces. You're going to see a lot of Justin Jefferson in the middle of that defense. What about you, Blake? What's your key matchup that you're looking at going into this Iron Bowl?
Well, mine was very similar to that just because of the point of Deontay Lawson being out. And so that changes a lot of things for the Alabama defense because now you have a new guy who's kind of your signal caller, a new guy who's going to be the helmet communication guy in Justin Jefferson. And this staff has a lot of trust in Justin Jefferson, but he doesn't have near the reps that Deontay Lawson does. And that also kind of limits where they're able to play Jihad Campbell because I don't think they're going to leave Justin Jefferson alone in the middle, whereas they could play Jefferson and Lawson together and play Campbell at Wolf some. So with Q Robinson hurt, there's a lot of injuries in this Alabama linebacker room and both the inside backers and the Wolves. So that's going to make things interesting with this front six against this Auburn run game. And just from the quarterback to the running back, they have a lot of really capable runners. I mean, I agree with you, Jimmy. I think Jarquez Hunter's probably the best running back in this league. They've got a really capable backup in Damari Alston. And then Peyton Thorne is a good runner in his own right. And in the Iron Bowl, like you talked about 2 years ago, Robbie Ashford had a lot of success. But even a year ago, Peyton Thorne, I think, ran for nearly 60 yards on Alabama and had a lot of success running the ball that way. So there has been the blueprint. Kind of like we've seen, and it's going to be important for Alabama to be sound up front. And it's interesting that this whole team this season has been up and down in so many different areas, and we've seen games where Alabama has been decently stout against the run. And so they've shown they're capable, but it's going to be really important in this game, especially when they're wounded, coming off of a loss where that was such a glaring weakness. Like there's no doubt in my mind that's what Hugh Freeze has been watching all week, and that's what he's seeing can be exploited. Like he's going to find different ways to try to exploit that, and they have to be ready for it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wrote what you guys are talking about down, so I'll go a different route and save that for a little later because I think that's kind of what this game boils down to. But I think similarly, on the flip side, I'm interested to see what Alabama does from a run game standpoint because the 3 games before the Oklahoma game, Alabama was having success on the ground. They had 271 against Missouri, a huge game at LSU with 311. And I know it's Mercer, but 189 on the ground with 3 touchdowns. Those are efficient offensive days from a rushing attack standpoint. And then to go on the road against Oklahoma, we talked about it. Oklahoma has a good defense, but 30 carries, 70 yards. That's under 2.5 yards a carry. Again, no points from a touchdown standpoint. Just not getting it done on the ground. And granted, we did see that they kind of leaned on Jam Miller a little bit. It looked like Justice Haynes is maybe a little banged up. I think he had just 3 carries, and he was effective when he ran the ball. But look, he was just kind of trying to stretch some things out on the sideline and test things out throughout the game. I think he only played 8 offensive snaps, so a little limited from a personnel standpoint, but still the quarterback run wasn't there from a ground game standpoint. Just they weren't able to get things going. And then Auburn, from a run defense standpoint, I know that Texas A&M rushed for, I think, 167, but that was on 50-plus attempts. So just a hair over 3 yards to carry. It's still rushing for over 100 yards, but you look at Auburn's last 4 games before that, they had held opponents to under 100. Now, granted, half of those were losses to Missouri and to Vanderbilt, but still, just from a matchup standpoint, I think if Alabama is able to get the run game going, it'll mean success for this offense, and that'll open things up for the passing game for guys like Ryan Williams. Maybe these tight ends, you got 2 seniors that are playing in their final home game, and Robbie Utes and CJ Dupree. We didn't really see the tight ends get that much involved in the passing game this past week, but we also saw CJ Dupree struggle just from a catching standpoint. So I think being able to run the ball can open some things up for this team, and maybe they get things going against Auburn, who has a good defense. And the last thing we'll do before getting out of here is talking about just what we think needs to happen for Alabama to win the game. So for you, Jimmy, Alabama comes out victorious in this Iron Bowl if they do what?
And it's so oversimplified to say bounce back, but we've seen them do that twice in games before. To me, it's on Jalen, and I hate putting so much on one guy because it's not fair. It's not really what football is. I mean, that's not real. Football's the ultimate team sport, yet we so much always want to make it about one guy. And so many made last week's loss about one guy. I think the win Saturday, and I expect Alabama to win the game. I think it will be largely on the shoulders of Jalen Milroe running and throwing and proving that he's one of the best or most productive quarterbacks in this league. And I think it's on him for Alabama to bounce back, for Alabama to win. Jalen has to play well and be the reason the offense is productive on Saturday.
What about you, Blake? Alabama wins the game if what?
They got to take care of the ball. I mean, you look at two of these losses, and they've had multiple turnovers in the Vanderbilt game. They had multiple turnovers in the Oklahoma game. And in both of them, Alabama put themselves behind the eight ball with turnovers that directly handed the other team points. And so you can't have that. You can't, especially in a game that's going to be it's a rivalry game, and Iron Bowls get weird. Like we've seen that so many times. So whenever you have, if Alabama goes out there their first drive and has a mishandled snap or a badly thrown pick, and it ends up with an Auburn touchdown early, like who knows how the game goes from there. Like you've got to take care of the ball, and if they do that, if they can. Last week I said the turnover margin was going to be the key to victory. They lost the turnover margin badly, ended up losing the game badly. If they can take care of the ball, I trust this defense to be able to create a few takeaways. They've still been able to do that at an extremely high rate this season. So take care of the ball. And like you said, Jimmy, that starts with Jalen Milroe. Do that, and I think they win the game.
Yeah, I agree with both of those points. And I'm going to kind of make it quick because you guys talked about it a lot earlier. I think if they're able to stop the run, they have a lot of success in this game. You look at Alabama's losses. I wrote it down over here. Vandy, 166 yards, 2 touchdowns. Tennessee, 214, 2 touchdowns. Oklahoma, 257, 2 touchdowns. If they're getting up above 150 yards and they're able to score a couple times on the ground, it's usually not a good day for Alabama. Even the South Florida game, they were able to run the ball on Alabama. I know they were able to win, and they won kind of running away with that one from a final score standpoint, but it was a game where they kind of struggled. So if Alabama's defense, missing its captain in the middle, is able to stop the run, I think you win the football game. Kind of simple as that. But if not, then it's going to be, like Blake said, another weird Iron Bowl that comes down to, who doesn't turn the ball over or maybe who does. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm going to be fascinated to see how this team bounces back. Before that, though, I know this will come out on Thanksgiving. Wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. I know we're thankful to everybody for listening to the show, for tuning in on YouTube or via podcast. I'm thankful for these two knuckleheads that put up with these questions each and every week. And it's been a weird season, but they're thankful for everybody in the BOL community. So if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell. If you're listening via podcast, give us 5 stars. And I guess, I don't know when we'll see you guys again, because we don't know when Alabama's next game will be after the Iron Bowl. But thanks for listening. Thanks for everything. And we'll see you guys in the next show.